Hello guys, I am so sorry for the delay today. So the topic for our session today is esophageal pathologies, and we have Kash from the third year who's going to cover that topic. As always, if you have any questions in the middle, yeah, if you want her to repeat anything, please stop her and do so. But maybe ask the questions at the end. And yeah, Kash, you can start you can share your screen and start. I think Kash had an internet problem. She's just joining back in a bit. Go ahead, Kash. You can start with your session.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I think you're audible, but just speak a little louder.
Okay, yeah. Assalamualaikum guys. My name is Kash Duman, and today we will be discussing the pathologies associated with the esophagus. Um, this is like a pretty vast topic, but I tried to keep the focus on the things that are usually tested, and I will discuss the other stuff also, but we'll keep the focus on things that are usually that are high yield. I've tried to loosely divide all the pathologies into five major groups, and that's how we're going to discuss them. I'll briefly mention them now, and then you can go through them one by one. Firstly, I will be discussing the mechanical obstructions which are associated with the esophagus. The most important one will be the tracheoesophageal fistula. After that, we will discuss the functional obstruction. And the only thing that we're going to discuss in this is aphasia. We will then talk about esophageal varices, which is a pathology secondary to portal hypertension, and we'll get to it when we discuss this. After that, we'll discuss esophagitis, which is basically the inflammation of the esophagus. And with that, there are a number of types of esophagitis, but we will keep mainly our focus on reflux esophagitis and the associated most common GI pathology, which is GERD. We'll also talk about bad esophagus in this. And then lastly, we'll talk about the tumors, which are the adenocarcinoma and the squamous cell carcinoma. Now, before we start, the pathology, I just want to quickly, in like 2-3 minutes, go over the anatomy and histo. The reason I want to do this is because if you have like an idea of what the anatomy is and what the histo is, normal anatomy and histo, it's very easy to remember stuff which is wrong. So I'll just quickly go through it, not go into a lot of detail, but um, yeah. So I'll just quickly go through this slide. So as you can see, the esophagus here, it's a muscular tube which is approximately 25 centimeters long, and its main purpose is to convey food from your pharynx at the level of T6 to the stomach at the level of T11. Now, the things that are important to us related to pathology of the esophagus. The first one is it is also called the upper esophageal sphincter. And then there's another thing that you can see right here is that it's formed by the phecopharyngeus muscle. The second constriction is the thoracic constriction. And the only thing that's so significant here is that it's being crossed by the arch of aorta region. This one is also known as the lower esophageal sphincter or the inferior esophageal sphincter. And this is where basically your esophagus ends. And how it does is that it passes through the esophageal hiatus, which is present in the right crura of the diaphragm, into the cardia of the stomach, which is that there's a, so the upper third consists of the striated voluntary muscle, whereas the lower third consists of smooth involuntary muscles, and the middle third has a mixture of both striated and smooth muscles. Another thing, we divide the esophagus in accordance to where it's present in the body. So you have the cervical esophagus, then you have the thoracic esophagus, and then you have the abdominal esophagus. I'm not going to go into the details of what and everything, but it's important. So something like we will have this in the BCQs also, that certain pathologies associated or more common in like the upper half, upper third, or the lower third, and so on. So that's why it was important to mention here. The innervations to the esophageal nervous plexus. Now, in the blood supply, the artery is supplied by the esophageal branches of the thoracic aorta. Now, you can see I've mentioned a lot of veins. It's because there's a pathology which is associated with the venous drainage of the esophagus, and that's why I go into a little bit of detail. So the upper third of the esophagus, or the cervical esophagus, is usually drained by the inferior thyroid vein, whereas the middle third or the thoracic esophagus is supplied by the drained by the azygous system. However, the lower third or the abdominal esophagus has a supply which is relevant to what we're going to study. So the left gastric vein is going to drain into the portal system, which is going to be of relevance when we do esophageal varices. And that's why the abdominal esophagus or the lower third of the esophagus is of importance when we talk about esophageal varices, because the venous drainage is directly related to the portal system, which is what causes the portal hypertension. We'll get to this in detail when we do it. The histo is just pretty basic. We know there are epithelium of stratified squamous non-personalized epithelium. Then you have the lamina propria, which is the dense irregular connective tissue, which is right here. And then you have the muscularis mucosa. The second layer is the submucosa, which is which contains mucous glands, and it is also a dense irregular connective and the duodenum throughout the GIT. Then you have the muscularis externa. This has two layers. There is an inner circular layer and there is an outer longitudinal layer. And between these two layers, you have the myenteric plexus or the Auerbach plexus, which is also of significance in the future slides. We'll discuss about that. Now, the type of muscle present depends on what part of the esophagus you're talking about. So like we discussed, if it's the upper half upper third, then we're talking about the striated muscles. If it's the middle third, we're talking about a combination of striated and smooth muscles. And if it's the lower third, we're talking about smooth muscles only. And then you have adventitia. Now, we're done with this, so we'll start with the pathology. The first uh, is the mechanical obstruction. We will be mainly focusing on tracheoesophageal fistula, but there are a couple of others that I'll quickly go through. So basically, what is a fistula? A fistula is any abnormal connection between two tubes. Here, as the name suggests, we're talking about an abnormal connection between the trachea and the esophagus. In general, when we talk about these mechanical obstructions, we these are congenital and they are detected shortly after birth. During feeding, you can tell that there is some mechanical obstruction in the esophagus that is leading to this particular problem. We will now with the fistula. This is a congenital defect, and obviously connection between trachea and esophagus. Now it has, as you can see in this picture here, it has 5 different variations. I will go through the most common and accounts for almost 84% of the cases is type C, which I this one particularly. But to quickly go through this picture, they're basically the first one. Uh, there is no fistula. Basically, atresia is either a blind pouch or a non-canalized cord, which replaces any tube. In this case, we're talking about the esophagus. So non-canalized means there is no open channel as such. So in the first category, there is no fistula, there is no connection between the two tubes, but there is an atresia present. That's why they call it esophageal atresia without is a esophageal fistula. Now the second category, the second category has 3 types. In the first, and esophagus is having an atresia, and what part is having a fistula. So in type B, there is a fistula in the proximal esophagus and atresia in the distal esophagus. So it says esophageal atresia with proximal tracheoesophageal fistula. Here, this is the most common type, type C. There is an atresia in the proximal esophagus, right? And in type C, there is a fistula in the distal esophagus. Whereas in type D, you have an atresia there is an atresia as well as there is a fistula with both the proximal and the distal esophagus. So both of the parts are attached to the trachea. And in the last category, there is no atresia, there is only a fistula present, which is seen over here. So coming to type C only, if you look at this anatomy, it's very easy to understand. I'm so sorry. It's very easy to understand usually babies, so it's pretty understandable because whenever a baby will feed, the feed which is atretic. So obviously the food will come out, and that's why we say that vomiting is possible. Next set of symptoms are aspiration and abdominal distension. So basically, what happens is because the trachea is linked with the esophagus, whenever a baby will breathe, some of the air will pass into the esophagus and into the stomach, and which will cause abdominal distension. And this can also cause gastric contents to move up and cause aspiration. Another symptom is polyhydramnios, which is basically excessive amniotic fluid. Now, how that works is that usually whenever the amniotic fluid is formed by the kidneys, right, and the baby they swallow some of that amniotic fluid and goes into the GIT to be processed into whatever nutrients it needs from it. However, because of this atresia, they won't be able to swallow the amniotic fluid that they usually do. This will cause an excess of fluid present in the amniotic sac, hence the polyhydramnios. And then you have the esophageal web. The second one, I'll just quickly go through this. They don't usually ask much about it, but it can either be congenital or acquired. And basically, what happens what they mean by an esophageal web is that there is a protrusion of esophageal mucosa in the upper esophagus. So there's sort of an obstruction caused by this protrusion, and because of this, the patient will present with dysphagia, and the dysphagia is usually associated with solid foods or unchewed foods, because obviously when you swallow something that is a big chunk of food, it won't be able to pass through because of this obstruction. Whereas liquids won't need that much space to pass through the tube. That's why usually whenever someone has an esophageal web, they will present with dysphagia of poorly chewed food or solid food. And another important thing is that esophageal web is associated with Plummer-Vinson syndrome. Plummer-Vinson syndrome is a syndrome that has a triad of three symptoms, which is severe iron deficiency anemia, esophageal web, and DC reta. So usually you don't get tested much, but you just need to remember that esophageal web forms the triad, is one of the things present in the triad which forms the Plummer-Vinson syndrome. The third is the Mallory-Weiss syndrome. This is basically a pathology associated with excessive vomiting or retching, right? And what happens is that this causes longitudinal lacerations of the esophagus. Whenever you're vomiting, there's basically antiperistalsis happening, right? However, excessive vomiting, की वजह से there is failure to relax the gastroesophageal musculature in response to the antiperistalsis. Now, because of this, the refluxing gastric contents will cause the esophageal wall to tear, and it will also cause them to stretch. जिसकी वजह से you have longitudinal lacerations formed. And because we say that this is associated with severe vomiting, so any condition that is associated with severe vomiting, like bulimia or alcoholism, usually these are the conditions which lead to this. And another thing that important is that it presents with painful hemichemesis. It's important to remember that it's painful, and hemichemesis occurs because these lacerations, which occur due to the wearing and the tearing of the esophageal wall, they start to bleed. And lastly, there is a complication associated with it, which is the Boerhaave syndrome. You don't need to get into the details of it. Just remember that a complication of Mallory-Weiss syndrome is Boerhaave syndrome, which leads to the rupture of the esophagus. That's it for the mechanical obstruction. Then we have the functional obstructions, and we only have to discuss activation list. So achalasia literally just means without relaxation. A is without, and chalasia is relaxation. So that's exactly what happens in this condition. And because it's a functional obstruction, there is lack of relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter that we discussed when I was talking about the anatomy. So because of this incomplete lower esophageal relaxation, and because of the esophageal aperistalsis, you have disordered esophageal motility. So the triad is incomplete LES relaxation, increased LES tone, and esophageal aperistalsis. The pathophysio behind it is that it occurs due to the damaged ganglion cells in the myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus, like I discussed earlier, is present between the circular and the longitudinal layers of the muscular astrophia. So, and damage to those will obviously cause, because the myenteric plexus is basically responsible for your bowel motility, it is also responsible for relaxing the lower esophageal sphincter and also responsible for peristalsis. Any problem with the myenteric plexus or the cells associated with it will cause problems with all of its functions. It can also be idiopathic or secondary to a disease like Chagas. Just need to remember the name of Chagas disease. They sometimes ask, or they don't usually. Now, the symptoms are usually understood if you understand pathophysio. So basically, this dysphagia associated with solids and liquids. The reason is that there is no peristalsis. Now, because there's no peristalsis, nothing, not even solids or whatever you're eating is just begin accumulating in the esophagus. It can't go down, it can't go up. There is no peristalsis. So because it's being accumulated, the food starts to rot, and that's why you have this really bad breath. The third is a bird beak sign on a barium swallow study. It's a diagnostic feature, and you can imagine it as the lower esophageal sphincter is present below, right? So anything above that keeps on accumulating and forming a really broad base which just narrows at the point of the sphincter. So it's sort of a bird beak that's formed on the barium swallow. And then obviously because of the accumulation of the food, you have high lower esophageal sphincter pressure. Yeah, that's it for achalasia. We'll now move on to esophageal varices. Now, basically, esophageal varices is a pathology which is associated or secondary to portal hypertension. I'll just quickly go through what portal hypertension is so that we can understand this more clearly. By portal hypertension, I mean there is an increase in the blood pressure in the hepatic portal system, right? And usually occurs due to hepatic cirrhosis. And to explain cirrhosis in like a word, it's basically liver tissue replaced by a fibrotic tissue. Now, the portal system is connected with the systemic venous system in three places, and one of those places is the um, lower part of the esophagus, right? Other two places I'm not mentioning them now because they're not important relevant. So, repeating this again, that the portal venous system is connected to the systemic venous system at three places, and one of them is the lower esophagus. How are they connected? So basically, the distal esophagus vein which surrounds the lower left gastric vein. So that's the connection between the systemic venous system and the portal venous system. Now, whenever there is any obstruction to the blood flow from the portal vein to the inferior vena cava, the venous blood will start accumulating in the portal system. Because of this accumulation, the pressure will increase, which will cause your portal hypertension. Now, what happens is in order to solve the problem, their photosystemic shunts form. What these shunts do is that they divert the blood away from the portal system, and this allows the blood to back up in your systemic vein. And where do these photosystemic shunts form? They form in places where the portal system has a link with the systemic system. And one of those places is the esophagus. So how do these shunts form? They form by the presence of collateral channels, and these collateral channels they dilate, and that's what basically happens in esophageal varices. So the esophagus has these submucosal veins which dilate because of the impeding portal blood flow, causing the portal hypertension. I hope this is clear. If you guys have any questions, you can ask because I feel like it's a bit tricky. And like I said, usually portal hypertension is associated with cirrhosis, so it occurs in 50% of cirrhotic patients, and most commonly associated with alcoholic liver disease. Morphologically, you can see in the picture they appear as tortuous dilated veins within the submucosa of distal esophagus and the proximal stomach. They're usually asymptomatic, but if they rupture, it can lead to massive painless metamesis. And painless metamesis is important because when we were talking about the rupture over here, it's painless. Now, another thing, the rupture is actually a medical emergency and it can actually lead to death. So it's a very like serious condition. Next, we have esophagitis. Now, esophagitis has a lot of types. I'll quickly go through these three, and then we'll come to the main one, which is more important. There is chemical esophagitis, which is associated with medicinal pills like doxycycline and bisphosphonates. What happens is they adhere to your esophageal lining and they dissolve in the esophagus rather in the stomach, leading to esophagitis. And they generally cause self-limiting pain and particularly odonophagia, which is painful swallowing. There is infectious esophagitis, which is more common in debilitated or immunocompromised patients, and the common pathogens are Candida, herpes simplex virus, and cytomegalovirus. Then you have eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a chronic immunologically mediated disorder. This is more common in the upper parts of the esophagus. I suggest that you guys remember that because we usually ask this question in the BCQs. that where is eosinophilic esophagitis common? It's common in the upper part of the esophagus. And what happens is on the microscope you see epithelial infiltration by large number of eosinophils, and there are evident rings in the upper and mid portion. It presents as food impaction and dysphagia in adults and feeding intolerance and GERD-like symptoms in children. Treatment is pretty basic. You just need to identify things which you are allergic to and prevent, like restrict them from your diet. Now, the fourth one and probably the most important is reflux esophagitis, which is basically reflux of gastric content in the lower esophagus. Now, this is associated with GERD, and GERD is the most frequent GI pathology. So it's kind of important to understand this. The risk factors include alcohol, tobacco use, obesity, CNS depression, pregnancy, hiatal hernia, delayed gastric emptying, caffeine, etc. The pathogenesis behind it is that basically your stratified squamous epithelium is resistant to abrasion from foods, but it is sensitive to acid. Um, that's because the submucosal glands which are present, they secrete mucin and bicarb. So usually whenever there is a reflux from the stomach acidic content to the esophagus, it will cause problems because of this, because your stratified squamous epithelium there is sensitive to acid. And it presents with heartburn, dysphagia, regurgitation of sour tasting gastric contents, and can cause damage to enamel teeth. Morphologically, what's important is that if it's mild GERD, you probably won't see anything present, but in the significant disease, you might see eosinophils into the squamous mucosa followed by neutrophils, which is pretty severe. There is also basal zone hyperplasia, and there is elongation of the lamina propria. And this is most common in those which are over 40 years of age. And yeah, that's it. And complications include esophageal ulcerations with strictures, metamesis, and a very important complication is Barrett esophagus, which we'll discuss after this. Treatment is usually by proton pump inhibitors, but if you guys know that. Then we start. Next up, we have Barrett esophagus. So this is a like a 10% of patients usually present with those who have chronic GERD present with Barrett esophagus, and this is characterized by metaplasia of the lower esophageal mucosa from stratified squamous epithelium to non-ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells. If you just remember the first line, that's it for your exam. Nothing else really, and the third one actually as well. But this is the first one that this is what this pathology is associated with metaplasia, and it's basically the change from stratified squamous epithelium to non-ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells. That's all there is to it. And obviously, Barrett esophagus has an increased risk for esophageal adenocarcinoma. We'll discuss that when we come to it. Morphologically, there is a picture in Robbins. You guys can see it. It shows as chunks or patches of red velvety mucosa, which is extending upwards from the gastroesophageal junction. And the presence of goblet cells is the biggest diagnostic feature when it comes to Barrett esophagus, because normally they're not present. It is due to the metaplasia that goblet cells are formed, and you can see that in the H&E stain as wine goblets. And the dysphagia is usually high or low grade. Usually, you can tell Barrett esophagus by endoscopy or biopsy, and yeah, just remember that it's a metaplasia and that it can proceed to esophageal adenocarcinoma. Now we start with the tumors. The first one is adenocarcinoma. Adenocarcinoma is a malignant proliferation of glands. So basically, how is this malignant proliferation going to occur? It's going to occur at the background of Barrett esophagus. So Barrett esophagus had goblet cells, and then these goblets and then mucous glands are going to proliferate, which will can cause adenocarcinoma. It is the most common type of esophageal carcinoma in the West, and it is 7 times more common in males. I discussed that it arises from the pre-existing Barrett esophagus. It's very important to know the location. So it usually involves the lower one third, and it presents with pain or difficulty in swallowing, progressive weight loss, chest pain, or vomiting. Morphologically, if you look at it, it appears as a flat or raised patches in otherwise intact mucosa, and tumors may form large exophytic masses and infiltrate diffusely or ulcerate and invade deeply. Usually, by the time symptoms appear, the tumor has invaded your submucosal lymphatic vessels, and there is a less than 25% 5-year survival. So the prognosis is not very good. Next, and the last one is the squamous cell carcinoma. So the squamous cell carcinoma usually occurs, that's the etiology, it occurs usually in adults older than 45 years of age. And it affects males 4 times more than the females. It's the most common esophageal cancer worldwide. The risk factors are basically anything that irritates your squamous epithelium is a risk factor for squamous cell carcinoma. So alcohol and tobacco use is self-explanatory. Poverty, caustic esophageal injury. There's an example of lye ingestion, which is and or any other chemical ingestion which can irritate your squamous epithelium. Then you have achalasia. Basically, in achalasia, like we talked about the presence of rotting food inside your esophagus. That can also be an irritant. Then you have the Summer-Vinson syndrome, uh, and then frequent consumption of very hot beverages. It usually arises in the upper or middle third of the esophagus, and it begins as an in situ lesion in the form of squamous dysplasia. Early lesions appear as small gray white-like plaques, and it takes months to years to grow into tumor masses, which can become polypoid. Clinical manifestations include dysphagia, weight loss, hematemesis, and adenophagia, as well as obstruction. Usually, there are other symptoms which are involved along that are hoarse voice and cough. Whenever they talk about hoarse voice, it means that it involves the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and if there's cough, that means it involves the trachea. Now, obviously, there is a presence of lymph nodes, involvement of lymph nodes, and it depends on the location. So if it's in the upper third, the cervical lymph nodes will be involved. If it's the middle one third, then the mediastinal, paratracheal, and tracheobronchial lymph nodes will be involved. And if it's the lower one third, usually the gastric and celiac lymph nodes are involved. So yeah, that's it. And thank you. If you guys have any questions, you can.
Hi, Kash, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Uh, th- uh, I wanted to ask something about what you said in the esophageal varices about the portal hypertension. मुझे वहां तक समझ आया जहाँ आपने ये समझाया कि portal system is connected to the venous system in 3 places and one of them is the lower esophagus. तो उसके बाद से आप थोड़ा सा और repeat कर सकते हो please?
Yeah. So basically, what we want जब भी आपका portal hypertension होती है, you form
हम्म.
portosystemic shunt. ठीक है, वो शंट कैसे बनेंगे दैट यू और उन शंट से हम क्या करते हैं, हम ब्लड को डाइवर्ट करते हैं फ्रॉम द पोर्टल सिस्टम टू द सिस्टेमिक सिस्टम, राइट, एंड वी कैन डू
Physiological
दैट.
condition में या pathological condition?
This is a pathological condition, right? So in order to correct it, it forms photosystemic shunts. To correct the portal hypertension, they form these shunts ताकि blood आपका divert हो जाए. क्योंकि there is an obstruction. The blood portal system से inferior vena cava blood नहीं जा रहा. तो हम systemic circulation में blood को भेज देंगे ताकि वो वहां से inferior vena cava की तरह जाए.
Okay,
समझ आ रहा है?
okay, ठीक
So
है,
you're
ठीक
forming
है.
a shunt to let the blood go to this like destination, but जो actual उसकी जो route है वो it's not working because of the portal hypertension. So we
Right.
want कि हम shunt बनाते हैं, वो वहीं बन सकता है जहाँ पे there is a link between the portal system and the systemic circulation. So
And that is the
that's
lower
why,
esophagus.
yeah, and you form, and there are other places as well. तो आप शंट बनाते हैं और कोलैटरल चैनल्स के थ्रू जो है आप उनको शंट करते हैं ब्लड को, एंड दैट्स व्हाई देयर इज डायलेशन ओवर देयर एंड यू फॉर्म वेरिसेस.
That's why?
That's why those collateral channels dilate and you form varices.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.